All right, so to start off, I was just curious, like, how similar are you to Lawrence Wolseley?
I'm thinner. Um, I'm not really much like him. I mean, I have the same enthusiasm for film,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't really make the same kind of movies. Nobody does anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, even the guys that it's based on. William Castle didn't make giant bug movies. That was Jack Arnold. I mean, it's an amalgam of a lot of different kinds of people.
Yeah, but when you watch that, it feels like a very personal movie.
Oh, it is. I was the same age as the kids in the movie. I had a little brother the same age as. I lived in a little town. I didn't live in Key West. I lived in New Jersey, but my room looked quite a bit like the room of the kid. In fact, that's all my stuff on the wall, my drawings, my old monster magazines. And so, yeah, it was, and I was a kid during the Cuban Missile Crisis, and I remember the feeling. I remember thinking that this was the last weekend.
Yeah. And when would you say, like, you first fell in love with those type of B movies?
Probably when I was started going to the movies. I mean, the first movies kids see they see Disney. It's the first thing they take you to see. But then if you happen to be lucky enough, as I did, to have a Saturday matinee program at your local theater, then they would run movies from a couple of years ago, or older pictures like The Wizard of Oz. But you know, 50s was the era of the Atomic Fear.
Yeah.
Giant bug movies, and I saw them, and I saw Camp Outer Space, and I saw all those kind of movies when they were new, and they were like great. I mean, I just thought they were the greatest things, and so I got my father once to take me to see Tarantula because it was only playing for 2 days on Wednesday and Thursday, and there was no way I was going to go unless he brought me. And he was a golf pro.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
He was tired, and he came and he said, "Please, you got to take me. You got to take me." And so he takes me, and I'm so scared watching this giant spider movie that I'm out in the hallway in the lobby pacing around, and my father's alone in a theater watching a giant spider movie. So. You know, I was crazy for those things.
Yeah, I just loved how that movie kind of made fun of the whole nuclear crisis.
What, matinee?
Oh, yeah. Well, it did a little bit.
Well,
like
it does in the sense that
what they did.
Well, yeah. I mean, the duck and cover movies. In fact, I guess that scene got cut out. There used to be a scene where they watch a duck and cover movie.
Yeah.
But, well, it was a strange time because everything was so heightened. But we really believed it. I mean, we really thought this was it.
Yeah, but I don't know, like, because that's one of the films that's kind of how, you know, Eli Roth. He's like said before, horror movies, they're a great way, at the times, like with times of crisis, that's what people will flock to.
Well,
like,
yeah, because it's a safe way to be scared. It's the same reason why people go on roller coasters. You know, you and particularly when you're younger, kind of the idea of confronting death is kind of like, it's a kind of a joke because you're never going to die. You're young.
Yeah.
You know, but when you get older, you find that older people tend to not like horror movies quite as much because it's a little too close to the vest for them, and the whole idea of confronting death is not something they want to do with any regularity.
Yeah.
But that's one of the reasons they've always been so popular, and even before there were movies. I mean, there's always horror stories. And now, what's remarkable about them is that they were always considered such a junky genre.
Yeah.
And now it practically the movie business can't function without horror movies. It's proved to be the most viable genre of all. I mean, whoever thought there wouldn't be any westerns in 1950s? We always thought westerns will go on forever. No more westerns, but horror movies, yes.
Yeah. Would you say though, like in the '80s, when that was kind of like your big era of making these type of movies, like would you have trouble like convincing people about the tone, because that's not everything?
Well, the tone was never easy for me because I remember when I did The Howling, the first day's dailies came in, and the head of the studio stuck his head in the editing room and he says, "Is this a horror movie or a comedy?" And that was the point. It's like you're not supposed to know. Horror to me works better when it's juxtaposed against humor. So I've always had a little tone problem with studios. They always wonder, well, what's he doing? Who is this for? You know.
Yeah.
But when it works out, when they leave you alone to do it your way, it usually ends up working.
Yeah, I always thought the atmosphere and how it kind of pushed it for me to being a horror movie. Because like when you're in the woods and you see that
it's
bottle,
definitely it's definitely a horror movie. But it was a horror movie that knew it was a horror movie, and it was also knew that werewolves, which at the time were considered kind of corny because there had been a whole bunch of comedy werewolf pictures and stuff, and people weren't taking it seriously. And so we disguised it in the advertising. We made it look like a slasher movie.
Yeah.
And then when we sort of snuck, once the audience had been bludgeoned, for the first half of the movie, then we snuck in the werewolf stuff, and that's how Friedkin made The Exorcist. You know, there's so many unpleasant images and creepy things at the beginning of that picture that by the time the pyrotechnics started, the head rolling and all the stuff that might have gotten laughs if it was just by itself, the audience was like in a complete state of shock, and they were ready to accept anything.
Whose idea was that though? Because I'd never heard like it was sold as a slasher movie.
Well, take a look at it. Take a look at the ads. The ad line is imagine your worst fear or reality. There's a screaming woman with a rip on the poster with some sort of a horrible hand on it. And it's like, there's no way you know it's a werewolf movie. I mean, we really did not sell werewolves.
Yeah. But were you okay with that advertising campaign?
Yes, I was, because I saw the first one, the earlier ad, which was a naked woman who was half werewolf. And I said, no, that's not going to work.
Yeah. Those transformation scenes actually still really hold up. Like, they're still pretty unsettling.
They're good. They should be a little shorter. I mean, they ended up being longer because the exhibitors, they ran that section for the exhibitors before the picture came out, and the exhibitors freaked out, and they thought it was the greatest thing ever. And so the studio came back and said, don't cut any of that.
So at first they were
so for
telling
me
you
it would be
things.
yeah, but for me it would be a little. I would speed it up a little.
But what was it like for you? Like, say when you brought those kind of like horror comedy movies into kids movies, like I imagine that would be more difficult.
Well, it depends on what you think of as a kids movie. You know.
Well, I mean, I guess like PG, because like a lot of people, if they go to the movies to see PG, like say, oh, it's a kids movie.
Well, that was the Gremlins problem. I mean, that was rated PG, and was one of the reasons they created the PG-13 because people, parents, not kids, but parents said, "Oh, this is too violent for my kid," you know. And I never heard a kid ever complain about it. And usually they didn't, you know, I don't know anybody who put their little sister in a microwave or any of that kind of stuff. And that was all I used to get. It was, oh, how can you make these horrible films for children? You know. And I said, first of all, it's not made for children. It's an adult movie that kids can see. You know, it's different than a movie that's actually a children's movie. Yeah. The advertising and Gizmo, you know, pushed it over toward it must be a family movie, you know.
Yeah. Would you see like Small Soldiers was like the big like issue you had with that type of?
No, that wasn't an issue. The issue with Small Soldiers was that it was not that it was it was perceived as an anti-military movie, which is not. It's not an anti-military movie, but. The problem also there was that when they started out, they wanted to make an edgy picture for older teenagers, and by the time the picture was released, they had decided they wanted to make a movie for children. But by then, we'd already shot the other movie, so it was very difficult in the editing to try to ride that fine line between what the sponsor, Burger King, was comfortable with and what the movie that we originally wanted to make was.
Yeah, what did you have to trim out?
Well, there's a lot of violence, kind of.
Really?
The whole house blows up. And at the end of the movie, you see that the house has collapsed. Well, there's a whole scene where it blows up, and it's all, you know, and there's lots and lots of soldiers with nails stuck in their eyes and stuff like that. And it was all good stuff, and it was all finished. It was all shot and done. The effects were finished and everything. But then at the end, it was like, no, this is too much. We got to cut it back.
Do you find it tougher and tougher to make movies like that now, especially with the studios? Like,
well, the studios are very, very difficult to work for now. There's so much oversight. If that's the word. Basically, people who don't know what they're talking about telling you what to do. That it becomes difficult. And you can talk to any filmmaker; they'll tell you the same thing.
Yeah. Are you referring to Looney Tunes? Because I imagine on a film like that, you don't have very much creative control.
Well, I had as much as I could get, but that was a year and a half of making a movie, and you know, you shoot the movie for 6 months, and then you edit it for a year because you got to have all the animation done. Well, by the time that the studio people have heard the jokes 80 times, they start saying, well, this isn't funny anymore.
Yeah.
And you go, well, you laughed the first time you saw it. And it's not funny now, change it.
Yeah.
And they were under the idea that all you had to do was change the voices. And I said, no, animation doesn't work that way. You do the voices first, and you animate to the voice. So you can't just change the line because the character is moving. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
You know? It was very unpleasant.
Yeah. It's kind of like when you see a trailer for a comedy, but you hear a joke so many times you don't laugh when you finally get to the theater.
Yeah. But I mean, it's not their fault. I mean, they have to see the movie a zillion times. The audience only has to see it once.
Do you think like audiences are less? I mean, if you look at a movie like Drag Me to Hell, like that's a really great movie.
They didn't show up for it.
Yeah, people didn't seem to respond to that horror comedy vibe they were going for.
I'm not the guy to analyze why that picture didn't make money. But I think it was perceived as too much of a horror movie audience movie, and that they did show up for the first couple of weeks, which horror movies tend to open well. But if they don't appeal to an audience beyond that, then they don't do well. And I think the title did not appeal to anybody but horror movie people.
Yeah. Well, also, I just think like since they just sold it as like a horror movie, people are gonna be very jarred when they see it's very slapstick.
Yeah.
So I think that was the big issue.
Yeah.
And I know you're just talking about like movies for kids, but like would you ever? Do you think people don't give kids enough credit? Like I know Henry Selick has said that
People
before.
never give kids enough credit. I mean, that was the whole thing with Gremlins. It was I just couldn't believe it. People were saying that there's, it'll be too horrible for kids. I said, Jay, kids are much more resilient than you think, and they're also smarter than you think. And that's why it's been so difficult, like on Looney Tunes, trying to keep people from dumbing down movies that are for kids, because if something goes over a kid's head, it goes over his head. He's not going to sit around and complain that he didn't get it. He's going to go on to the next thing. And movies now are cut so fast that, one thing changes, immediately another one follows it. So if you didn't like that, you like this. And so why worry about one gag?
And two quick questions for you before I wrap up. Would you compare, like, say,
to wrap up? That's what I think.
for Gremlins, because obviously a lot of the tech you guys were creating yourself. Would you compare, like, working on a film like that, which I'd imagine was very difficult at the time, say to like Looney Tunes, where a lot of the tech's already established?
No, actually, Looney Tunes was also difficult because even though we were doing following the footsteps of Roger Rabbit, which had a much harder time than we did, because the technology was far better by the time that we did it. There's still such a tremendous amount of work to do. Whereas on Gremlins, we had to literally invent a sort of Muppety kind of technology, and the movie became defined by what we could do. If Puppet couldn't do something, it wasn't in the movie. If a puppet was good at something, we did more of it and put it in the movie. And then by the time we did the second one, we created this machine to make this one gremlin speak and have his mouth move and all that kind of stuff. It was a brilliant invention, which of course now is completely obsolete. But at the time, it was really cutting edge, and that's actually one of the fun things about doing these movies is making stuff up.
Yeah. All right, last question. Can you tell people a little bit about the great site Trailers from Hell, who don't know it?
Trailers from Hell, which you should go to immediately, and has right now Roger Corman on it, talking about Tales of Terror, is a site that came about because I noticed that the movies that I loved when I was growing up were becoming obscure to younger audiences, because there's hardly any place for them to see them now. And when I was a kid, these movies were everywhere. We all knew about them, we all talked about them, and now people don't know. And so now, oddly, we're in a situation where there are so many movies available that were never available before, but it's as if they aren't available because people don't know about them. They can't see them. So Trailers from Hell is supposed to point people toward movies that we think they might like, or not like, but should be aware of, that they might not have known about. And by getting contemporary filmmakers to talk about it, we're hoping to be able to sort of raise the bar for these older pictures and get them back into circulation again.
Definitely. Well, thanks so much for your time, Mr. Dante. It was a pleasure. Thanks.